Okay, welcome to another episode of TMG People First Podcast. I have my co-host, Jason, and we have a special guest today. He came to our sales summit and totally just brought the energy and dominated. It was super interesting. I loved it. His name is Jamil Qureshi. He is a leading performance psychologist who has worked with elite athletes, Ryder Cup teams, Formula One drivers, Olympic competitors, and senior executives across global organizations. He is best known for his involvement with European Ryder Cup teams, where mindset, belief, and marginal psychological advantages play a decisive role under extreme pressure. Jamil is the author of multiple books on performance and behavior change and is widely recognized for his philosophy of act as if, the idea that identity-driven behavior precedes measurable results. His work focuses on belief systems, mental resilience, decision-making under pressure, and how small psychological shifts create outside competitive advantage in sport and business. Jamil, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you guys.
Yeah, this is going to be great. Jamil, first question we like to start with is, what is the first thing you think about when you wake up in the morning?
You start with a tricky one, don't you? I don't know. It's all different for me. It depends what mood I wake up in, I guess. I think what I try to do is I try to be as open-minded as possible. So I like the idea of the day unfolding. I'm not a planner. I'm not organised. In fact, my organisation is awful. So I quite like having a sketch of what I'm doing today, with obviously the commitments in the diary.
Sure.
But I like to, and I'll maybe talk more about this actually, is I like to work with my energy. And what I mean by that is that I'm not a big one on time management. I like the idea of energy management. Mm-hmm. So I will choose during the day what I do in accordance to how I'm feeling, apart from, as I say, the commitments are already in the diary.
Sure.
So for me, I think we perform best when we have a particular state of mind. So do you know sometimes you go to read a book and you read three lines and you read the same three lines, and you think, what am I doing? Put the book down. And the next day you pick up the book and you're 70 pages in before you know it. So, and it's not the book's changed, it's your state of mind, which is different. So what I do is during the course of my day, and this is almost how I start my day, is that I say to myself, given how I am feeling at the moment, what would be the next best thing to do? So, and I ask myself that a few times during the day. And so I might start my day with doing some easy emails, or I think, you know what, I feel really motivated today. I actually feel really energized. So I'll start that tricky project or proposal I was going to write tomorrow. So my day always starts differently, apart from the usual, apart from the breakfast, feeding the cats, doing all the usual stuff. But in regard to the workload, in regard to what being productive, I try and work with how I'm feeling. And so that's usually my first thought, is how am I feeling today?
That's cool. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up and a little bit what it was like ultimately until you came, to be this performance coach for athletes. I mean, how did it all unfold?
It's all luck. So I'm very lucky. So I fell into it. So I grew up in the southwest of England. And I wasn't particularly academic. So in fact, for me, I didn't really have a plan of where I was going or what I wanted to do. And so I liked finding out stuff and I liked learning, but it didn't mean I was academic. I was interested in all sorts of things which, weren't necessarily on the curriculum. So I'd find out. So I did my initial, when I went to college, I did business and marketing. And I went into a variety of corporate roles, and I just didn't like it. I didn't like working in an office. I didn't like being managed. I didn't like managing people. None of it. And so the one thing that I was really interested in was psychology. And before I went to college, I played a bit of professional sport. So I was playing some cricket, and so it was at that point I got interested in psychology, and I kept that interest. And so when I got disillusioned with the corporate world, I decided to chase my passion more than my pension. I thought, well, I'm interested in psychology. Go and do something in psychology. And I didn't know what that was, but go and do something in there. And it was only when I made that decision that things really worked out. So how I got into sport at the highest level And this is what I mean by pure luck. I wish I could say it was great business sense. So it wasn't. So I thought, I like psychology, I'll do something in it. And I started doing some talks on psychology to lots of people who didn't want to talk on psychology. But, I was interested in it. And there was someone who said, you know what? A friend of mine's a golfer on the European tour and equivalent to the US PGA. And he's looking for psychology and says and thinks you know something about psychology from what I've told him. So it's a friend of a friend. Can you come and work with him? So I went, sure. So I went and bought a couple more books on psychology, and so I worked with him, and he nearly won the Open. So he led the Open for 3 days. He lost on the final day to Ernie Els. But he was really generous with his praise. So he started in the national newspapers and on TV, in the UK, and was saying that this guy's really helped me. And professional sport at a high level is a really small world. So they all know each other. So immediately some of the best golfers in the world came to me saying, can you work with me? I went, all right. So, so decided to work with these golfers who were really good. And it was pure chance with that first customer. And it's funny, actually, I found out since that so many big businesses, multinationals, have been built on one customer. It's usually one customer right at the beginning who, you do well with, who invests in you, who has got good influence in their sector, and that's almost what happened to me. It was that other people found out about it and wanted it. And I worked in English Premiership and worked in, worked in international cricket, golf, Formula One, it's a whole mix, but it's all come about from, that initial piece of luck.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So when you're working with so we've heard you speak at our summit, and I've heard you before as well, but there was one thing that landed with me, and I found it to be fantastic. And that was act as if. And the story you shared, would you mind kind of telling us how you kind of arrived at that mantra, if you will, and that mindset, and how it applies to sports and professional in our circumstance, in our industry?
Yeah, it's a great technique, act as if. And it's the psychological principle that we must be now what we wish to become. So you sort of grow into it. And I was with a golfer who was 50th in the world. I said to him, where do you want to be in regard to world ranking? He said, 5th in the world. No, I don't want to be 5th in the world. Sorry, 50th in the world. I want to be 5th in the world in 3 years' time. So I said, imagine that you are it now. And if you were it now, and what would you be doing? And what would you be practicing? What time would you go to bed tonight? And what are you going to drink in the bar tonight? How would you take your shoes out of the locker tomorrow? So we went through a whole list of things that if he was 5th in the world, what would be different to what he is actually doing at 50th in the world? He found out it was completely different. And the best example I can give you, which I gave today, is that he said, I drink water tonight. If I was the 5th best golfer in the world, I'd drink water tonight because I want to win this week. I want to be number 1 in the world. I said, what were you going to drink? He said, cocktails. So we need to imagine that we are it now to become it. So if you were number 1 for being bold, so and your whole organization, your whole team, everyone knows number 1 for being bold. If you were, where do you sit in your meeting next Wednesday with that with those team members? What questions would you ask? Which bit of the agenda would you interrogate the most? Who would you share the outputs with for that meeting? And how would you share the outputs if you were bold? Would it be a phone call to people, or would it be an email? What tone would you take in an email? So once we pretend that we are it and what it would look like if we were that, it's a really useful way of working. There's another technique, actually, which I'll give you on this, which is quite similar. So lots of successful people will write lists on what they're going to do today, and people do. But very few people write a list on who they're going to be today. And it's a really useful little tool. And
That's
when
powerful.
Do you know when you write out your to-do
Yeah.
list? Now, what tends to happen when you write out your to-do list? And let's say you've got 3 difficult client calls. Difficult client calls. I don't want to make them, but they're going to be awful, but I'll do it anyway. Or I won't do it. So if you're me, I won't do it. So go and feed the cat. But if you write down your list and next to it put a personality type, so just one type, not only are you 42% more likely to get that task done, but you're more likely to do it with a frame of mind which will make the task go well. So hear me out on this one. If you've got, let's say you've got your list for your day and it says 3 difficult client calls, horrible calls. Then I've got an ideation, a brainstorm session with my team. Then I've got a tricky one-to-one with a team member. It's not really working out, but tricky one-to-one. Then just put one personality type next to each task. So maybe for the 3 difficult calls, you put optimistically or open-mindedly. And, so, and then what happens is that's the one thing you focus on when you make those 3 calls. So now you're more likely to make the call, but you're more likely to have that call with one thing in mind, which is the personality type or characteristic of being open-minded or optimistic. It doesn't mean it's going to go great, but you're giving yourself the best chance. That's what you're doing. So it's a really useful little way of working. It's a little bit like that act as if. So because you're going to focus on one character type. If you read self-help books from 300 years ago, people like Galbraith and Boswell read self-help. You might not read them, actually. You might have a social life. I read loads of them. But if you read these self-help books from 300 years ago, they said concentrate on one characteristic at a time. So what we tend to do is going to be better. So I'm going to give up smoking. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to go to the gym more. I'm going to give up the burgers. And we tend to talk about a variety of things. But I used to say concentrate on one thing. So if it's endeavor or servitude or loyalty, these lovely old-fashioned words, just do that one thing. And it's a little bit like act as if, or a little bit like this list on who we're going to be today. Just choose one thing. For that one task even. And let's just keep it simple. We're more likely to get things done if we've got clarity and simplicity in regard to what we're trying to do.
You had talked about earlier about managing your energy instead of your diary, we call it a calendar. So does that, have you found that by doing that, has that given you more energy versus not when you do it yourself?
Yes. So, it's horses for courses because we're all different. So, I know some people who, get amazing energy from being incredibly organized, really disciplined. Once it's all laid out and all, got a level of predictability, they've got their week's meal plan and they've got the kids' school uniform ready, folded on the bed, ready for them in the morning. And then they get energy because, they feel organized. They've got that control. I'm quite the opposite, actually. I get more energy when I'm given time and space. And so I try to create time and space. And this is why I'm on planes lots, as you know, we're talking today. But I really like it because there's nothing to do apart from to think and to, create. And so let's take this back to the world in which we're living now. Many people are almost too busy. When I speak to business people, salespeople, and I said, how would you get more done? And how would you, achieve more? And they say, give me an extra pair of hands, or give me more time in a day. And so that when you speak to super performers, people who perform at the highest level, so these are astronauts, fighter pilots, these medical teams who do these like 8-hour operations, Premiership footballers. They say, how do you get more done? And they say, I take more time out. They say the complete opposite. And so if you've got intense periods of performance, you almost need intense periods of recovery and relaxation. It's a real paradox in terms of say that, to get more done, we need to take more time out. But that's almost what it feels like these days. Geopolitics, emerging technologies, data and information overload. Whereas if we can sit back and take some time out to think about what we do, how we do it, clarity around the value that we're creating for others, and what's meaningful and purposeful in the work that we do, and how we do it, then maybe we make better decisions, on where we spend our energy. It's like you've got meetings that finish at 10 o'clock. When does your next meeting start? 10 o'clock. And your job in those 2 meetings is to get through them. So how many times have you sat in back-to-back meetings?
Drains you.
And and you sat in back-to-back meetings and you thought, once I get these 2 out of the way, I can get on with some work. Isn't it amazing how we don't necessarily understand the difference between activity and productivity? And what's more productive now, is to take some time out, and create some time and space to have a level of creativity, innovation, curiosity, about, how we can reshape our day and reshape our week, to create meaningful and maximum value.
So let's talk about value a little bit. You talked about that today with us as well. You talked about clarity creates capacity.
Yes.
We talk about when we bring value and value is understood, that creates clarity.
Yes.
And then if we can create psychological safety, then we can continue to align and potentially help the client. But let's stay on value real quick. We're in large, complex sales. We have a lot of new people here. They just heard you today. They're going to listen to this podcast. What would you tell them to do on them developing their ability to understand the value they can provide to business owners or to people?
Oh, it's a big question, isn't it? I think we need to think about, and I talked about it today, not what we sell, but by what our clients value.
Yeah.
We often define ourselves by what we sell, which is different to what clients buy, but even more different to what clients value.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a depth of investigation, which is needed to reveal that. So tailors, tailors say measure twice, cut once.
Yeah.
You get the right solution when you take time to understand. So taking time to understand is really important. Genuine questioning, proper fact finding, and away from the explicit needs, it's the implied needs. Some of the things that you pick up upon, which is how people are talking and what they're saying and what's of real value to them. And I think that trust is an important factor in this. I do believe that this psychological safety you talked about is incredibly important to uncover the real needs.
Yes.
People only talk in real depth when they trust you. Now, I always think to change your outer world, you have to change your inner world. So for people to see you differently, you need to see yourself differently. So rather than being a producer, salesperson, if you were a listener, I see myself as a listener, or I see myself as a questioner, and I see myself as someone who is good at challenge. Whatever it might be. We're talking act as if again, I guess. But what we're doing is that we're positioning ourselves in away from a sales role into a space of counselor or solutioneer, or listener, someone who's prepared to, seek to understand before they're understood. I think how Covey said it.
Yeah.
And I think that what often helps with trust as well and psychological safety is giving a little bit of ourselves away. I had a leader say to me the other day, said, I can't get my team to open up to me. It's really easy. I said, well, you need to open up to them. That's simple, isn't it?
Give first, show some vulnerability first, right?
But it is, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, we must be, what we wish our culture or relationships to become. Now, an important part of that is telling stories. So when you share a story, you give a little bit of yourself away.
Mm-hmm.
So I told a story today on stage. And although the story is interesting and the story has meaning and there's a payoff, there's an end to the story, you almost give a little bit of yourself away too, because this is a story that interests me. I find it funny. I find it engaging. I find it incredulous. And so now you know something about me by the stories I tell. So when someone tells a story, it tells you about who they are. And it's an important part of trust and psychological safety. So I think as salespeople or producers or as leaders, we should tell more stories. Now, if an alien came down to this earth and you had to tell the alien what it's like to be human, but you weren't allowed to tell them a story. And you give them data, you give them facts, you give them numbers, you give them a creds deck. And, you'd give them a presentation, and they won't know what it's like to be human. They wouldn't be able to engage with us with any level of trust or understanding or empathy. But what do we do when we try to convince people or get people to buy into things, be it an agenda or a product? Give them the data, give them the statistics, give them the facts. But facts don't change people's minds. So not every tribe or civilization on this planet uses the wheel, but every single one uses storytelling. So there are Aboriginal tribes who will measure the strength of a tribe by how many stories are told, because it builds connections, and stories change a mood. So it's a great way to change a mood, to make a connection. And any producer, any salesperson, any leader can communicate a message.
Yeah.
Very few can make a connection. And storytelling is a really interesting tool within that. So, and there's a variety of stories that we can tell. And the reason why I've joined this company, I'll tell you why. And the reason why, I do this job. And let me tell you a little bit about me in this story. I met someone who had this need the other day. I recommended something which went completely wrong. Let me tell you why it went wrong. But the interesting or fun thing from this is how we rectified it. These sort of stories start to reveal us, rather than, and allow people to understand us differently. Because it might be selling a vision story, it might be a personal story, it might be a variety of stories that give people a three-dimensional perspective.
I like that storytelling. I had to act as if, because in this psychological safety piece, because we are in a commission-only job.
Yes.
And I had big goals. And so I would tie a lot of my goals to an individual outcome or something like that. And that just created problems when it was time to sell. So I had to act, as if, and it really helped to develop the skill of empathy. I'm not a natural, empath, but it took some time. But now when I tell people a story, or I say, I help people make really good decisions for their business.
Right. Perfect.
That's what I do. I make the decision easy and clean and clear. And even if you don't go with me, you should still make that decision.
Perfect.
That makes a buyer feel really good, right?
Yeah.
And it's genuine, because I'm at that stage in my career. But it's hard to get there. It's taken a lot of pushing to get there. But then after that, we have kind of aligning together. I want to talk about specifically a golfer, unless you had more questions about this, Jason.
No, I do actually, because I think it ties back into something I've heard you say now a couple of times, that clarity is kind. And
that came from Jamil?
Uh-huh.
Oh. I've been repeating that. I haven't given you any credit for that. I mean, I'm sorry.
I don't know half the things I said.
I heard you say it twice. So what's interesting is to have
You've said that a lot in the board meetings and
for sure. But I've been saying clarity is caring, but I've heard you say clarity is kind a couple of times. But it ties back to that it creates a room for vulnerability and room for understanding because that clarity becomes really important. And then you can look to demonstrate the value. And so where does that, I heard you say it twice. I don't know what your take is on that, but when you hear that, what is your reaction to that?
I think that, I think simplicity is key at the moment. We live in such a complicated world. It's unpredictable, it's complex, it's uncertain, it's unfair. The world is all these things. And I think the people who are winning at the moment, have a narrow purposeful. I know what I want to achieve and create. And there's a simplicity and clarity around, what I do to get there, and what I offer. So I think if you help enough people get what they want, you in turn get what you want. And, some nice, interesting, and successful entrepreneurs I've ever worked with. People think entrepreneurs are really creative people, these are great ideas. It's not true. The vast majority of entrepreneurs I work with have one idea, and they see it through relentlessly. So it's one idea, never having another good idea. So it's one thing. So I'm going to make it work, And there's a simplicity around what they're looking to achieve, and a simplicity with the conversations they have with their people, And you can almost say it's fair. It's simplistic, and it's kind, because I'm going to get there. And if you guys want to help me get there, this is what you need to do. And or what we do together, and there's no gray areas, there's no complexity to that. I tell you where, and this is a slight aside, but I think it's really relevant. If you look at an English Premiership football team, and there's 11 players in an English Premiership football team, and 8 of them don't even speak the same language. Imagine in business managing this team.
Wow.
So forget sport. Imagine 8 of them, because one is from Uruguay, one is from Spain, one is from Portuguese, one is from Italy, and there might be a Ukrainian player and a Japanese player. So you've got 8 players in a team, 11 who can't communicate to each other, and then they've got different religious backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, different social backgrounds, different stages in their career, and they play in different positions, and yet they play brilliantly together for 90 minutes. Unless they're West Ham, then they don't. But the reason why they play brilliantly together is because of clarity, simplicity. And I know what role I have to play to win this game of football. I know the interdependencies. I know how I fit in with others, and I know what winning looks like. So it's really simple. To win a game of soccer, I know what winning looks like. Everyone knows how to win a game of soccer. So once you've got the simplicity, once you've got the clarity, that you can direct your energy into the right space. But even as a manager, there's a fairness and kindness to it. Your role is this. Your interdependency is that. This is what we say we're going to do to win a game of football. There's no discrepancies or miscommunication here. We've got a very simple contract, and people know their obligation or commitment to achieve it. So it's almost it both falls back on the individual responsibility then, an ownership to execute upon the idea that this is how we need to be to win this.
So when someone in that environment or in any team environment, when someone's not accountable, how are you coaching folks through that component, right? Because now you have clarity, and then all of a sudden you may have lack of accountability. Someone's in the wrong space or the wrong place, wrong position.
Yeah, well, 2 things I'll say on that, actually, is that the most successful teams I've ever worked with in sport or in business don't necessarily have a strong leader. There's not one thing they've got in common. And so most people think that a good team's got a good leader, but that's not true. They're actually a team of leaders. They're a team of people who lead each other. So I think that peer anything works, peer recognition, peer challenge, peer coaching. So when people are galvanized around a common purpose, when we all buy into what we're seeking to achieve and create together, then, we will manage each other into better performance when we genuinely believe in it. So when the why is big enough, it's funny because sometimes leaders say to me, I can't get my team to do something. I always say, is the why big enough? Because if the why is big enough, we sometimes don't need to bother with the what, telling people how to do it. They'll go and find a way because it's so important, so, yeah. And this is where I sometimes think we're too quick to train the people rather than fix the environment. Let's create more purpose, create more why, get a better environment for people who choose to be accountable, who choose to achieve things, have more ownership because they believe in that end goal. They believe in the common purpose. So co-authoring and co-creating helps, rather than telling people this is what we're going to do, and let's discuss it and agree it, shake hands upon it. So people are more likely to have ownership if they're co-authored and co-created. People are more likely to have ownership if there's clarity and simplicity. People are likely to have ownership, if there's a share in the end goal, and that doesn't need to be financial. It might be something which is meaningful to them.
Cool. So, Guff, what do we say? Oh, what do you say? If your why doesn't make you cry,
then your why sucks. That's simple. Tell us about the Ryder Cup. I mean, that's got to be a cool experience. There's a couple of us. We have an incentive trip we put together for some of our top producers, those that do it, to go to Adair Manor next year.
I know. I'm trying to get on that trip.
Okay, well, you're invited.
I've already. Do you know what? I'm good, and I'm glad this has been recorded. This is great. I've been trying to persuade Brad that I need to come along and work with these 5 people.
I approve. I'm not the CEO, but I approve.
Okay, that's good. Right. There's some great whiskey in Ireland. Can we cut that bit? Don't make this bit on.
Are you planning on attending, or do you go to Ryder Cups, or do you?
No,
you just coach and.
Yeah, I don't. It's funny actually because I did, and I used to go to all the big golf tournaments. Mm-hmm. So the last one that I went to was probably last year. I went to I don't know what it was actually. Can't remember. It was somewhere over here in America. But I can't remember what it was.
It was one of the big
majors,
ones.
one of the big ones, yeah. So, but I can't. I know. Sorry, Rory.
How
won
would you
it.
feel
Rory
if I'm
won.
like, I went to some soccer game, I didn't know what it was, and it was
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
yeah.
Masters.
So it's the Masters. Yeah, I went to the Masters. That's it. So I went to the Masters last year.
That's awesome.
And
People's bucket, half the country's bucket list.
know.
Go ahead.
So I went there, and but I tend not to really. I because the other thing is that if you work in like even if you work in English Premiership, there's still a lot of travel. So I live in London, and but if they're playing up in Newcastle, which is like 600 miles away from London, you might have to go there for a day or two. Formula One or golf. So I used to get to a golf tournament on Tuesday. I leave on a Sunday. So sometimes you'd be there all week.
Yeah.
And so, I can't do that now. So, I don't want that because I'm busy working with corporates and doing talks and workshops and leadership programs. So try and do everything just doesn't work. So, there were some golfers who you'd work with who want to speak to you once in a week. That's it, at the beginning of the week, and not speak to you again. And then there was some that you'd have to tuck into bed.
Some clients are the same way, right?
You read a bedtime story too. So there's some who needed a lot looking after.
That's great. Well, on these golfers, I mean, everybody can hit it 350, 400 yards. Everybody can. I mean, they're just unbelievable athletes. But there is a separation. Like there is somebody that is number one in the world, and how psychological is that from number one to 10 or from one?
Huge. Yeah.
I would imagine.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I was working with a golfer who was number one in the world that year. And I was working with another golfer who was like 126 that year.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through their statistics. I went through all the, driving accuracy and all this sort of stuff. There's nothing in it. You will be amazed. Have a look. There's nothing in it. So it was like, one of the statistics was like 0.28. And then the guy who was 26 in the world was 0.275. It's just like, it was nothing. And so the difference is marginal, but the difference is what goes on behind the eyes. And people say to me sometimes, and say, who's going to win this golf tournament this week? And I always say to them, I'll tell you exactly who's going to win it. And then they always lean closer because they're thinking about putting a bet on. And I say it's not going to be the person who makes the least mistakes. It's going to be the person who reacts best to the mistakes they make. Then they always look disappointed because they wanted a name. But it's true that all of these guys can play. You're absolutely right. But the difference is in the moments. There's a moment, so it's momentum. At some point, someone's going to end up behind a tree, or in the rough, or something's going to happen. And the real difference in the top 5 in the world, top 10 in the world, is how they cope with things which are outside of what they expected. So that's the thing that makes the difference. So it's how they recover, and it's really interesting because I always say that failure is part payment towards success, and the price of success is always paid in full and in advance. You don't get to number one in the world and start 3-putting. You don't get to number one in the world and start losing tournaments. It doesn't work like that. You almost need to learn to lose to learn to win. And, and it's a really hard thing for some people to get their heads around. So the price of success is always paid in full and in advance. And the people who get, top 10 in the world are the ones who absolutely realize that. And they see success and failure as equal opportunities to learn. They don't become attitudes, and I think that's the difference. So I think if you're in sales or you're in golf, consistency of mind gives you consistency of play. So, if you can approach things consistently, no matter what's happening with those last few phone calls, last couple of meetings, approaching consistently, and then you've got a chance of getting consistent outcomes.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I was just a friend of ours introduced us to a poem, and Rudyard Kipling, and there's a section of that poem that basically says, treating success and failure, treat those two imposters the same. And that's the first thing I thought of when you were saying
that. So and it's true. I do think that the best the best sports people, will absolutely have the ability to reframe failure, and I remember at Akron, Ohio, and it was a TPC, and I was working with Paul McGinley, was one of my golfers, and he led for 3.5 days, and Tiger was right behind him, and Tiger was playing from the cabbages. He literally couldn't hit a fairway, and I didn't see him hit a fairway all week, so he's hitting it into the rough. On the final day, Tiger wins it easy. It's like, great, fabulous news. So and I saw the interview afterwards, and Tiger said, I played great, played really good, and I really enjoyed it. The most enjoyable tournament I played in a long time. So, two things. That one, most of what he did was failure, but he saw it as enjoyable because it was testing and challenging, and that's an interesting game. Because I'm constantly in the rough, constantly making mistakes. This is going to be really interesting on how I navigate towards success here. So instead of seeing it as failure, head going down, shaking his head, being disappointed, this is good because it's going to be a test of my short game. And then he said I played great, and he said he played great because he focused upon the stuff which was going really well, which is a short game, and forget about the stuff that didn't work. And I'm really proud of myself. My short game was amazing, it was brilliant. So that ability to reframe, the ability to see things differently, and I think that sometimes when you celebrate what's good about you, it multiplies. If you keep what's bad about you to yourself, it tends to go away anyway, it diminishes. And you think about that, one of the things which, I mentioned it today in the talk, that, we sometimes weaken a strength by trying to strengthen a weakness, which is ludicrous. And, and I've seen so many people on teams do this, whereas, you can be really successful by thinking about what's good about you and your assets and developing them, much more so than trying to fix your weaknesses sometimes. Because sometimes people go to fix their weaknesses and two things happen. Is that one, they can't do it, so they feel bad about themselves. Or secondly, they work really hard on it, which means they're constantly talking about their weakness. They're talking about stuff they can't do, and that has a debilitating effect, rather than talking about the stuff that they're really good at.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You also talked today about self-awareness, and to be introspective, right?
Yeah.
Tell us more about that, because you want to be self-aware of your weaknesses, but you also want to be self-aware on where you put your energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do think that self-awareness and introspection are really useful. Arsene Wenger, who's a manager in the English Premiership League, and he was with Arsenal for a number of years. He used to say it's the number one thing in players that he looks for is self-awareness. So, can you tell me whether you've had a good game or a bad game and why? And I've got to admit, it's so true, really true. So I've worked with soccer players, who'll come in and say that I had a really good game because I did this and I did that and I did the other, and they're absolutely right. And some said, "You had a good game. It's the rest of the team which are rubbish. We lost because of them. It wasn't me. I had a great game. I thought you were rubbish. So I watched the game and you were rubbish. So in fact, you were all rubbish. And so I do think that self-awareness allows us to understand what we need to amplify, or what it is that we could magnify to get better results. And I often find that people are wrong about themselves. And we're probably much more likely to score ourselves low on some of our assets rather than higher. So
we found that here. I mean, everyone that scores themselves, they score themselves too low.
Yeah. So I think that almost a good way to understand ourselves is sometimes through other people or through caricaturing things. So it's all coming back to act as if, isn't it, really? That if you went into a meeting and said to your colleague, I'm going to be much bolder in this meeting. I'm going to be braver in this meeting. Can you tell me what that looks like? You know me now. And, but I'm just going to ask some questions I don't usually ask. I'm going to challenge in a different way. Can you let me know? And that can be quite useful to get a different perspective and a different lens on things, or for you to do it yourself. Now, when I used to sometimes work with golfers on the practice round, I get them to play 2 balls. So they'd have a ball in the middle of the fairway, and they would play the shot that they're going to play. And then I would put a ball down in exactly the same spot and said, if you were a bold golfer, if you were a brave golfer, what shot would you have played? You'd be amazed at the difference sometimes. If I was really brave, I would have done this. But what they're doing all the time by caricaturing, by looking at the extremes, is they're getting to a place where they're starting to understand themselves a bit better. So if I was brave, I would do that, but I would never do that in a tournament. I just couldn't. Why couldn't you? Well, I think, and then he started to talk, and so I think through better conversation and exploring some of the parameters, some of the wider extremes of how we can perform, I think that we might get to know ourselves better.
Mm-hmm.
I think we fall into habits too quickly. So here's a depressing statistic for you, is that 40% of what we do as human beings is done by habit alone. So what that means is that when you walk back into the office, have a look around the offices, have a little wander around. And you've got some lovely offices here, and they're all got glass too, so you can have a little look. And you'll see people on the telephone. You'll see people writing on whiteboards. You'll see people in meetings. Almost half of what they will be doing will be done for the sole reason they did it yesterday. You'll be amazed. You say to people, why do you prospect on a Wednesday? Best day to do it. Why? Always has been. So, what do you do on a Friday morning? Check my emails. 9 o'clock Friday morning, do it. And so why? It's like, I've always done it. You'll be amazed. So if you look at your traditional competition, can you imagine if you could break habits in your organization or your culture or your business by 1%, whilst your competition do 39%? And there might be, do you know what? I'm going to move my prospects to text message sooner in the sales cycle. More personal. I'm going to try it. I'm going to give it a go. And because it just breaks a habit of what I usually do. And it may or may not work. But you found out something more about them. You found out something more about yourself too.
Yeah. Man, really good. What else do we have for Jamil?
No,
We want to respect his time.
For sure.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
I was just hoping for some easy questions. You got me here under false pretenses. You said this is a really easy interview.
It is.
I think the journey of self-discovery, and the other thing we kind of left the summit with is like the lifelong discovery, being a lifelong, just being curious, right?
Yes.
Being consistently curious. And how do you feel like that plays out into the overall mindset of performance?
Yeah. So if you think that Tiger Woods remodeled his swing, took it all apart and put it together again when he was number one in the world, so which is unheard of. Can you imagine a business doing that? A business saying that, we need to cannibalize our own products, which are really successful at the moment. We need to eat our own babies. And, let's kill everything that's successful and reinvent, reimagine, repurpose. I think it's really hard for businesses to do it. And it's really hard to give up what's allowing you to be successful to allow you to be successful. But if better never stops, then we should be constantly curious and challenging. So we should always be thinking, is there a better way? And particularly with the rate of change at the moment. So if you look at the complexity and uncertainty and unpredictability, you can almost argue now that the issues that a company will face are unimportant because you can't predict the future. Who knows what your industry is going to look like in 5 years' time? So you can't predict the future. So the issues a company will face are unimportant, but the ability to form a team or create a mindset which can deal with those issues and spot the opportunity within them is essential. And the future demands us to be different. And part of that is to be more open-minded than we ever have been. So if we're constantly challenging the assumptions, because that's what the outsider will do, who'll come in and disrupt our industry, so we'll challenge the assumptions. Why is it that insurance companies work like this? Why is it they sell like that? Why is it that, and so when that's an amateur or an outsider, you come in and challenge those assumptions. And this is what we've seen in so many areas at the moment. We're not seeing companies being wiped out. You're seeing sectors being wiped out because of the level of disruption. And we suffer from this competitive myopia. So, a bit like running a race, you measure yourself against someone who's just behind you or someone who's just in front of you. It's the niche player who's stealing a bit of market share, doing something really interesting in the value chain is most dangerous. Your competitor isn't someone who, is running alongside you. It's 3 kids who are in China and they're drunk in a hotel room and they're talking about blockchain. They're the people, who are going to be most damaging to, a sector in financial services. So, I think for us to be constantly curious, constantly challenging, why do we do things like this? Why is it that's happening? And I honestly believe that curiosity is worth more than creativity at the moment. If you ask the teams to be creative, they'll come up with a load of ideas. But they won't necessarily create value. Just come up with ideas. If you ask them to be curious, then it's more rifle shot than shotgun. So, and the curious questions are things like, why is it that these clients buy this, but they don't buy that? It's interesting, isn't it? They buy this, but you'd think they go and buy that, but they don't. Why is it that we can't get these 2 teams to work together ever and to never work together? Why is it that clients ask us for this, but we don't provide it? So why do they think we do? And I think that these curious questions, are perhaps where the breakthrough moments lie. So the more curious we can be, the more challenging, the more we can unlearn, the more that we can test our own assumptions. I think the more insight and provocation we get.
I love it. You said today the immigrant will always see something different than the citizen.
Yes.
And we have a person here named Josh Tinkle. He came from the healthcare industry, comes in insurance, and he'll ask 9 questions. I'm like, that's obvious. Then he'll ask 1 question, and I'll be like, wow, I can't believe we never thought of that.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's kind of exactly what you're talking about. So it really resonated with me today when you said that. And you also don't play golf, but you coach golf. Right?
I've never picked up a golf club in my life. I've seen what it's done to other people. They
tell you all the
It drives them crazy. I don't have anything to do with it. No.
I have picked them up, and it does drive me crazy.
I gave up golf.
You seem sane, Jason, for golf. Don't play it; it'll drive you mad. So, I'll tell you what the interesting thing is in golf is that as an amateur, and time you speak to amateurs, they'll hit the ball badly all day, literally all day, and then they'll flush it twice. 2 good shots. And that's enough to get them back next day.
That's right.
Just enough.
Just enough.
Yeah, and then you speak to professionals who have played the hardest course in the world, in the toughest conditions, and they play 68 great shots and 2 bad ones. Do you know what they want to talk about?
The bad ones.
They'll sit on the edge of the bed with their head in their hands. I want to talk to you about the 2 bad ones. It's enough to stop them playing next day. That's the thing.
So funny.
It is
Mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mad.
Well, hey, really appreciate you stopping by. Great to get to know you. Glad you're here, and thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Where can people find you if we have business owners listening? They want to engage your services for speaking or leadership training. Where can they find you?
I don't really use social media. The only thing that I use is LinkedIn.
Okay, great.
So I tend to post lots on LinkedIn. So I tend to post some articles on there about psychology and whatever else. So I use it quite frequently, tell people where I am in the world and what I'm doing. But
LinkedIn.
I also put some bits in there. Yeah, I can never take LinkedIn too seriously, though, so please don't judge me by my content. I'm usually bored on a plane or something, and I post an article to do with psychology. But
cool.
But I try to put a little bit of humor in there.
Okay, follow Jamil on LinkedIn, and I cannot recommend him high enough. And I go to one of these every 3 to 4 months, either somewhere in the world or other mastermind groups I'm a part of. Every bit as good as anybody I've seen.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your
Thank
time
you.
today. Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.